Hi everyone, this is Nate ZL2NAT, and today I'm going to show you how to update the ham radio firmware into the Kydera CDR-300UV. Now the firmware that I'm loading today is still a beta release. It does have a few limitations which I'll go through shortly, but once the official firmware is released in a few days, this process will still be the same. Just make sure you use the correct firmware file. Okay, so the first thing that we're going to do is to put the radio into DFU mode. So I'll just turn the radio off, and to put it into DFU you hold down the power and the P1 buttons together. You'll see the radio comes up with a white screen and the LED is illuminated. Now before you do any firmware update, it is important to back up the radio file, the CPS file, or the code plug if you will. The reason being is that when you reflash the radio with the new firmware, it basically deletes everything. So make sure you do have a copy of the code plug. Once the radio is in the DFU mode, we can go and open up the firmware update tool. So open up the firmware update tool. Make sure that you don't have your CPS software open, otherwise the COM port doesn't work. I'm on COM port 5, so I'll open that. Click on the Open APP file button at the bottom, and then select the latest version of the firmware. So this firmware here is the beta version. I'm just going to load that in. Once you've done that, you press the IAP button, and that will load the firmware to the radio. Okay, and you'll see it says current pages, it's clocking up there, has a total of 389 pages to go. So I'll just momentarily pause the video and we'll come back and show you what happens next. Okay, we're back and the radio is just about done writing. Once the firmware is flashed, you'll see it comes up saying that the checksum is right and the radio is now turned off. So that means it's been flashed correctly. It has the latest firmware version in the radio now. So we'll turn the radio back on. And you can close down the update firmware program and load up your CPS file. Okay, so those will be familiar with the layout of the general CPS. I won't go into any details in this video. We'll do another video related to what each of the options are. But for those that have used the program before, you'll notice that there are now two new options. One is ham contacts, the other one is ham groups, and there's a bit of an explanation on each one. Today we'll focus on the ham contacts. Now to import the CSV file, you press the import button, load the most recent version of the user database. Now this is just the generic CSV file, and it is the correct format for this Kydera CPS. So we'll open it up. I think at the time of the video here there's about 169,000 contacts loaded, so you'll see that it shows now the contacts, and if we scroll down you'll see it comes to about 169 odd thousand. Oh, gone a bit too far, but you'll get the idea. Now, a couple of things to note. You'll see here that the contact alias, which is the callsign, and the DMR ID, these columns are illuminated. The name, city, state, and country are not. So there's two options for writing the contacts to the radio. There's the 16 bytes file, and if I click on 128 bytes, you'll see that name, city, state, country, region are now also illuminated. Now you can write the radio with all the data if you wish, but as at the time of this video, it's taking about 30 to 40 minutes to write every piece of data, so it's very slow. So for today's purposes, I'm just going to write the 16 bytes, which will be the contacts call sign and the DMR ID. Now there are buttons at the top. That's to read the radio, that's to write the radio. We don't use those for contacts. You must click on the write radio button here, and that will start the process to write the contacts to the firmware. So we'll press that, and you'll see the radio goes into flash write mode, and it starts writing the contacts. Now it does say that there's 1,322 contacts. It's done by groups, so it does actually still write the 169,000 odd contacts to the radio. Now this will just take a few minutes. It's much quicker than the 128 bytes version where it takes 40 minutes. So this will take about 2 or 3 minutes, maybe 5 at the worst. I'll just pause the video again and we'll come back once it's nearly done. Okay, so we're back and it's just about finished writing all the contacts to the radio. And once that's done, it'll just take you back to your main screen of your radio, just your normal programming. Now, something I forgot to mention before is that you can update the contact list anytime you like. You don't have to reflash the radio, and you don't have to rewrite your code plug. You can just come in here, import the contact list, and then write the contact list. Also, if you have flashed the firmware from scratch, and you would have noticed that all your normal parameters were not loaded, you can do that first and write to the radio, and then update the contact list. Okay, so with the contacts all done, we'll go back to the radio view, and I'll just zoom in a little bit here, and we'll change it into talk group 91, and we'll connect to that one, and it should now show the call sign of the contact as it comes through. Okay, now you'll see that there is a contact call sign coming through, KC5RJL. So as I said, the firmware version that I've loaded is in beta testing, so it doesn't have all the contact information. It's just to prove the concept, but the next update will have all the contact information, including the name and the location. So hopefully that gives you an overview of how the radio firmware is flashed and the contact list updated, and we'll see you next time. 73.